I think I've been fairly lucky. Of the over 265 games I've played on this channel, very few of them can be considered objectively bad. I mean, when you look at something like Celebrity Deathmatch, it's a pretty bad game. Sure, it facilitates fights between drunken morons so they don't punch each other out in real life, but beyond that, it's not much. It's just a stupid little 3D fighting game that tried to cash in on big celebrity names because it really has nothing else going for it. If you want to go even further, Bubsy 3D. Enough said. But when it comes to the games on my channel, even the ones which left me a lot to criticize have usually had something good to praise about them. But that's not to say that I'm above calling them out for being the most incredibly disappointing things I've ever played on YouTube. So, without further ado, here are the top 7 most disappointing things I've ever played on YouTube. Fair warning, this video may contain spoilers. Number 7. Five Nights at Freddy's Sister Location. Wait, hear me out. I don't think Sister Location is a bad game per se. I just think it's disappointing. And there's a huge difference. Truth is, I could make an entire video about the Five Nights at Freddy's experience I've had. It's a rich series with lots of variety in its games despite originating from a very simple premise. Survive while sitting patiently in a stupid chair. It kind of combines defend the castle with alien isolation. You're terrified of the creature, but you know all you can do is sit there and hope to not die. Sister Location is the first in the series to truly deviate from this formula. 3 of its 4 predecessors had you stuck in a single seat, while the 4th had you stuck in a single room. Here, we get to fully explore the facility, which, on its own, is not such a bad idea. The problem is that the rest of the game doesn't keep up with what we've come to expect from the series. The original Five Nights at Freddy's was a low-budget indie game that came from a relatively unknown developer, and caught fire due, in no small part, to its ability to scare the shit out of YouTubers as well as its rich lore. The gameplay is simple and, based on the number of knockoffs, incredibly easy to create. But the idea was what made the game special, and that's what carried on to Five Nights at Freddy's 2, 3, and 4. But in each game, the idea evolved. New animatronics, new ways to die, new things to be careful of, new environments, and of course, new lore. By Five Nights at Freddy's 4, the animatronics were so detailed and the world felt so immersive that it gave me one of the worst scares of my life. Anyway, as far as I'm concerned, Sister Location was the first in the series that truly fell short of every previous game. To its credit, its one evolution is that it gives you far less repetitive tasks to perform. But to me, it just felt like a series of one-off minigames. One night you wind up a suit, one night you pop open an animatronic, one night you make sure Foxy's still on a stage, and so on. While this works with the story, there's absolutely no focus to the mechanics of the game, and so it just feels scattered, making it hard to immerse oneself. And then there was that serious difficulty increase on night 4, for which the game did nothing to prepare you. It was the point in a horror game when it stops being scary and pulls you out of any immersion it's built up. It's the weak point of dozens of indie games, but Five Nights at Freddy's had never suffered from it before. I mean, except in its extra content, which is totally understandable. And to me, this is where the game failed. With its weak scare power and inability to really hold on to any kind of atmosphere, I just felt like it was a step backwards from every other single game in the series. It left me feeling, well, as Merriam-Webster puts it, defeated in expectation or hope, and thus disappointed. Number 6, Forklift Man. There's a phrase in my industry which can be applied to many things in the real world. Do one thing and do it well. Forklift Man is the antithesis of this philosophy. This is a game that seeks to let you solve puzzles by using physical interaction with the world. Think a little like Among the Sleep, where you as a toddler have to manipulate the world to make it navigable. Forklift Man forces you to move and stack boxes to traverse obstacles and gaps in order to reach the next area. It's not the most original idea nor the most creative, but it is a solid one, and everyone has to start somewhere. Even something built in a couple hours can be a compelling game if it's solid and intuitive. Forklift Man is neither of those. The game has a few convoluted controls, but the primary mode of play is to extend your Velcro-ish arms out to grab boxes and manipulate them. With that in mind, it's clear that the most unfortunate thing would be if this one control was infuriating as all hell. And that's exactly what it is. In every single puzzle, you can be guaranteed that the boxes will stick to walls, will fall from your hands, and will just generally be impossible to manipulate. I mean, for the first few puzzles, this isn't that bad, since they're pretty simple. I even praised the controls at one point when I played the game. And not a minute later, the words out of my mouth were, "I swear, you are the worst, Cube!" That was subsequently followed by more moments of frustration. Oh my god, this is literally the worst. And more. These controls are impossible! And more. This is impossible. You can't do this. You cannot manipulate these well enough to actually stack them. So this cannot be the answer. And that's all this game became. A game of one control that barely worked, keeping me stuck on one level for over 10 goddamn minutes with almost no progression. Even when I thought I knew what to do, the game was actively working against me. There's two kinds of games that should work against you. One is a rage game, or at least a game with a very steep learning curve. And the other is a sandbox game. A couple of examples of rage games or incredibly challenging games are Surgeon Simulator and Super Meat Boy. There's a time and a place for these games. They're made with accurate, pristine controls that work perfectly. Sometimes so perfectly that the player must also be perfect. And the challenge of the game is the steep learning curve that makes those difficult goals achievable. Forklift Man does not do this. The controls are so imperfect and unpredictable that even good gameplay is not rewarded. On the other side, you have a sandbox game like Goat Simulator. This kind of game can be broken and ridiculous because that's what makes it so fun. Who knows if I'll get 5 points for blowing up this gas station or 5 million? That's the fun. There's no real goal, no consequences, so just do whatever and have fun with how broken the game is. Forklift Man, on the other hand, has a goal set to be achieved by a specific task. So, future game creators out there, if you're going to make a game with a task or an end goal, make sure the controls can get you there. On the other hand, if you don't care about making good controls, just let the player do whatever they want. In other words, don't make Forklift Man. Number 5. North. Let me start this one off by saying that I feel a little bit dirty criticizing indie games. With a few exceptions, yes, I'm looking at you, Air Control, indie developers genuinely set out to put their heart and soul into a game. They're different from AAA games in that they're the unfiltered expression of their creators. Unfortunately, all the heart and soul in the world doesn't mean anything if your game fails to pass on any kind of emotion to your players. Case in point, North. It really starts you with a great feeling of emotion as you begin your journey, slowly panning over a view of the clouds before letting you read through some quick and dirty backstory about settling in a new town. And then suddenly you're dropped into a dark alleyway, your mouse flickering in the center of the screen, with naught but some of the most sluggish controls I've ever dealt with. As you begin to explore the world, you see the root of the real problem with this game. The game explains nothing. Take the church, for example. You walk inside, see a bunch of alien creatures around an eye, and then they kick you out. Why? What the hell are you asking me for? Meanwhile, at your quote-unquote home, there's pills that apparently make you feel bad, except I don't know how or why. You can also talk to some of the aliens there. You can read some papers, you can listen to the radio, or you can look through a giant hole in the wall. But none of it means a damn thing. Even work, presumably the only thing you bothered to come to this lousy town for, just looks like a giant desert graveyard filled with industrial walls. There's a few interactables here too, but nothing does any real damn thing. The only section of the game that felt like it meant anything is the area beyond work. It's the first area of the game with any sound, and gives you a timed challenge. Except it forgets to tell you what the challenge is, leaving you to die in the cold wastelands of whatever the hell this place is. It just left me frustrated, confused, and not wanting to play anymore. I'm sure this game had a point to make, probably something about being lost and confused in a foreign land. Actually, maybe this game did a better job than I'm giving it credit for. Number 4, Rides with Strangers. The problems with Rides with Strangers are very similar to those of North, but they're a little bit different as well. In this game, you play as a complete dumbass who chooses to get into a vehicle with a total stranger because a job interview is clearly important enough to risk your innocence and life by hitchhiking. I don't know if you can get different drivers. I don't think so, but I got a creepy priest who continued to talk to me as we edged closer to our destination. With each question or statement, I was able to reply with a variety of answers from, "I am clearly mentally ill and need help," to, "I am a complete saint and have never harmed a fly." On the surface, this is a really, really cool premise, despite how stupid your character is for doing it to begin with. The game preys on an entirely different kind of horror than usual. It fiddles with the part of your brain that helps you adapt to and feel safe in the world around you. It strips you of that security and makes you feel uneasy and uncertain about your choices in a very realistic scenario. No monsters, No paranormal activity, no flickering lights. But this game disintegrates when it comes down to how the ride itself is implemented. First and foremost, there is absolutely no indication of which answer the priest wants. Should I try and make myself appear as holy as possible, so that he thinks I'm better off not becoming a victim? Or should I play it cool and realistic, and appear as normal as possible? Or maybe should I try to be off-putting and indignant so that he'll leave me alone? Go on, pick. A, B, or C. Well, it turns out that unless you picked Q, you're wrong. Not only does the game not give you any indication of when you make the right choice, leaving it up to complete guesswork, but it doesn't even appear to be consistent. I'll admit I screwed up when playing this. There is an additional control where you can look at your driver, which apparently calms him down. A decent idea and probably a good one to utilize, if only they hadn't introduced it after shoving into my face an entire page of controls, which only apply to the first 20 seconds of the game. And what's even dumber is that there's a specific button to press to look at the driver. Why? I used the mouse to look around the car. Why is that not sufficient to be able to look at him? As I aptly pointed out in my video, so I can't look at him. That's kind of creepy. It's weird that this game ended up so far down the list considering it has only two fundamental flaws, that its controls aren't intuitive and that it's difficult to know or to learn which option to choose. But when those two things are absolutely central to the success and enjoyment of the game, that totally explains why this game disappoints so heavily. Number 3, Bevel's painting. The two most crucial points of any storytelling media are, debatably, the beginning and the end. The beginning must suck your audience in and get them engaged in your world, and the ending has to leave them feeling at least somewhat satisfied. The beginning of Bevel's painting is also the beginning of its problems. You start the game without any cutscenes or backstory and are just dropped into a room full of paintings, after which you talk to a bunch of students, who don't talk back, and then warp into a painting. What reason do I have to be here? Why am I in a painting? How did it come to life? Why should I care about moving forward? Answering these kinds of questions is crucial to motivating the player to play onward. Beyond the beginning, stuff just kind of happens. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. There's some quick time events, some chases, some puzzles, and that's it until the endings. And that's brutal. I would compare this game heavily to Blank Dream in its execution, in the kind of story it wants to tell. However, with Blank Dream, details about the character's life were dropped in quite consistently, sometimes even too much so you can at least understand and relate to the main character. With Bevel's story, I feel nothing, and I know very little about her. She suffers from feeling alone in her life, and as a result has reasonably low self-esteem, and most likely depression as well. She also has some issues with her father, judging by the crayon drawing we see of him. But that's basically all we learn. As I mentioned though, endings are important too, and they can actually solve these kinds of problems by connecting elements of the story in your mind in a way similar to fridge logic. But an ending must be satisfying. If done correctly, people are frequently willing to deal with a subpar or even straight up bad middle story if the ending is decent enough. Take, for example, the movie 28 Days Later. Some people like it, some people don't, and I'm not going to say it's good or bad. As I watched it though, I didn't really find myself enjoying it for a number of reasons. With that said, there was a point near the end where there was a crucial moment between the two main characters. In that moment, I said to myself, if they're going for a specific outcome, it could save the entire movie. And I meant it. It would have made all of the character development make sense, the story would have really come together, and it would have been a really unique idea for an ending. They didn't go for it, sadly, but at least from my perspective, they had created a moment at the ending of the movie that was so powerful that it could have changed my perspective on the entire story. That's how powerful an ending can be. So what does this have to do with Bevel's painting? Building upon the aforementioned issue of the beginning feeling lacking, and the story not elaborating on details of Bevel's character or life, the problem is simply that it doesn't really tell a story at all. You see a few basic things like that crayon drawing and some notes from Bevel, but there's really no story to be told. As a result, the ending is all that's left to save the game from disappointment. And it does not do that. To be fair, the game has like 10 endings and I only got a few. The first one I got, Long Dream, just straight up made no sense. You're chased by an unexplained skeleton reaper guy until you find a painting that lets you exit the painting you enter at the start of the story. The end. After having to look up a walkthrough, then going back and redoing a significant number of things in the story, I achieved the meaningless illusion ending, which ends with you falling out of a locker onto your face. That explained a lot. By making one small tweak, I instead got the real me ending, which did suggest that one of the enemies in the game is actually a reflection of the negative things within Bevel. So that's something. Lastly, there was one more ending I got called Bevel's Painting, which is as close to the true ending as you can get. It gives what I consider to be a minor explanation by showing that Bevel is actually the dark-haired girl and the entire game you experience is her creation, a painting of the white-haired Bevel. Adds a bit of logic at least, but it's not exactly fulfilling. The best I could surmise from all the hints and suggestions was that the world was Bevel's recreation of her own life through artwork. But that's just not a fulfilling ending. Without being able to satisfy some kind of goal or motive from the beginning of the story, there's just no feeling that the game has ever been completed, and therein lies a disappointment. And as icing on the cake, the game also suffered from some incredibly obscure puzzle solutions like repeatedly trying to open jammed doors or hiding in plain sight. But those would have been easily forgivable if the game had presented a beginning, middle, or end worth playing. Number 2, Fez. This game was painful. Every single stupid, seething second of this game made my brain bleed in a brand new way. Okay, that's a slight exaggeration, but it was pretty bad. It was the first and remains the only series which I've actively quit. I mean, games like The Forest and The Binding of Isaac have both stopped, but I'm definitely open to going back. Fez, on the other hand, is something I will never ever touch again. Why? Well, let's start with the good, because when you first start playing, the game actually seems quite good. It's a colorful open world with plenty of personality and a very neat and unique mechanic. The game is two-dimensional, but you can rotate the camera around yourself in increments of 90 degrees to change the angle from which you look at puzzles. This changes which blocks connect to which others. It's neat. Now let's move on to what's not so good. This is a puzzle game in which any puzzle that is not impossible is annoying. Just like Bevel's Painting, this game features its own language. This isn't inherently a bad thing, but unlike in Bevel's Painting, the use of the language here is crucial to progressing through the game. I had to have a legend beside me at all times just to make sense of the puzzles. They weren't even just used for explanations, but for the pieces of the puzzle as well. It just got to be slightly annoying. But don't worry, it gets worse. I'll demonstrate by showing you the worst puzzle I encountered, the Metatron puzzle. So you've got 8 cubes here, each with a letter. Not only do you now have to remember which letters are on which blocks, or risk looking at your legend every 2¼ seconds like I did, but you now have to organize them in a specific order in every direction. Plus, you can rotate the blocks by spinning the camera around so you can add or remove letters from each side of the puzzle's orientation. So essentially, you're trying to solve 4 puzzles at once, one in each direction, and of course the blocks don't line up nicely. You can't just drop them, you have to throw them, otherwise what would the challenge be? So now you have to make sure you push the blocks into the right line in all 4 directions while also making sure you've rotated all 8 blocks the right way, while also trying to remember which letter is which, while also trying to remember what the actual answer is, and all this comes after you had to figure out what the puzzle's answer was to begin with. I think I summed this up well when I played.
It's bad puzzle design. When you have the answer and it takes you 23 minutes to put it into place, that's bad puzzle design. Okay, now what's your problem? The stars aren't aligned properly?
Oh, and if you happen to fall while carrying a block, good game, you have to leave and start over. Then you get to the end and one piece is out of place, gotta redo the whole thing. And then finally, once it's all right, and you know it's right, you're sure it's right, the game doesn't care. You still have to turn the camera in all 4 directions to tell it that you're done. Even after I knew the solution, this puzzle took me 8 minutes on camera, but well over a ½ hour off camera just to get the shit lined up properly and redo the puzzle more than once due to bullshit. It was absolutely excruciating. Now yes, this was the worst puzzle, so the others weren't this horrible, but this is the type of crap the game handed down to me. It was finicky, awkward, overly long, and just made me groan in agony thinking about what more I had to do. And in the end, that's why I ended up quitting. There was no motivation to continue to subject myself to tedium of which 90% would be cut. And trust me when I say, this game almost ended up as the #1 entry. But no, not quite. That honor is reserved for something even more disappointing. Now before I reveal the #1 entry, here are some runners-up that came close but didn't quite make the cut for this list. Kitten Rampage. Tried to be like Goat Simulator, but tried too hard, resulting in, why the hell are there giant spiders trying to kill my kitten? Space Seclusion. presents an interesting twist on Five Nights at Freddy's with a free-roaming world, but with horrible enemy AI and just a very uninteresting execution. Hindsight, Descent into Darkness. Platforming should be about solid controls, interesting worlds, and unique mechanics. This game performs only one of those three with its unique hidden tunnels mechanic, and doesn't offer much else. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, the most disappointing game I've played on this channel is... Colot. Yikes, this is gonna require some explaining. I mean, unless of course you watched a single episode of the series, in which case it's pretty clear why it's on this list. This is a horror game which seeks to make you feel lost, intimidated, and uncertain. That is commendable. Those attributes are the foundation of good horror. The issue is how they go about it. They give you a compass and a map, and expect you to immediately learn how they work. Even if you know how they work, which I did at the outset of the series, the compass and map line up so poorly that it makes you question that. Not to mention, there's coordinates scrolled in various rocks around the world that make it look like you're at those coordinates, when in fact they're hints pointing you elsewhere. I think? It's never really explained. So the central component of Colot is already fundamentally flawed. But don't worry, it gets worse. Now the game's premise is ingenious. It takes a real-life mystery and uses the vague legendary components of it to develop a frightening world in one of the most unique horror locations ever, a snowy mountain range. Too bad they ruined the entire thing, like, immediately. I am not referring to the ghosts you encounter 20 minutes into the game, nor am I referring to the paranormal flying rocks only 15 minutes into the game. I'm not even referring to the magical ghostly orange footsteps you follow only 10 minutes into the game. I'm actually referring to the fact that they spoil the entire thing by putting the monster on the main menu. Ha! What? You thought they'd let the suspense and mystery build up and have the monster be a shocking reveal later in the game? No. Right up front, they tell you it's a monster. Maybe then, in Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, the menu should feature the fight between Raiden and the Senator. Or how about we forewarn prospective players of Silent Hill 2 about what James really did? Or maybe while we're at it, we can just add a subtitle to the Five Nights at Freddy's 2 menu that says, The Prequel. I didn't think I'd ever see a faster twist reveal than the one in The Happening.
I think I know what's causing this.
You do?
It's the plants. They can release chemicals.
But even without the annoying confusion of the game, or the completely ruined premise and twist, the game suffers from a fatal flaw all the way to the end. Nothing is ever explained. Maybe if you read every single journal and piece together every single detail in the entire lore, it forms a picture. But for what I was exposed to in my adventures, nothing ever made sense. The creatures didn't make sense, the narrator didn't make sense, the landmarks didn't make sense, and the ending was possibly the most confusing thing I've ever experienced. This is an excellent example of how to take a brilliant idea and completely fail at executing it. It turns something that could have been absolutely terrifying into something that was absolutely terrible. And there ends my list of the most disappointing games I've ever played on this channel. If you're curious for more in-depth explanations, I try to always talk about what I do and don't like about games after I play them. And don't forget to share in the comments the games that you've played that have disappointed you the most. But anyway, that's all for now, so thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.